As a trauma survivor, I have always been interested in resilience. But growing up, I believed it was something that you were born with. Then in graduate school, I learned that it was a quality that we all possess and a set of skills we can all strengthen. Most of my resilience has come from writing and seeing myself in new ways by confronting the stories I've always told myself. The more I did that, the stronger I became, and I've dedicated my life to helping others do this work. This podcast is for anyone who wants to understand their story and how to revise it, because when we do that work, we change the world. Welcome to Season 2 of the Writing Your Resilience podcast. As we begin our next adventure, I want to have a fireside-style chat with you about an issue that popped up several times during Season 1 and again in some of the interviews that I completed for Season 2, and that's the word forgiveness. Because I want to get right to that discussion, I'll simply share the questions I want you to ponder as we begin this conversation. First, what do you think about the word forgiveness? More importantly, how do you feel about it? What do you want to know about it? And finally, what relationship do you think it has to the writing process? All right, those are your questions. Now let's begin Season 2. Hey writers, have you started a memoir only to get lost in a sea of endless stories that seem to go nowhere? Are you wading through the messy middle of the revision process and searching for your narrative arc? Have you received vague feedback from agents or publishers or been explicitly told your book contains a lot of interesting and well-written stories that follow in and then format? The solution to all three problems is the same. Find your memoir's beats. But for most writers, it isn't as simple as buying a copy of Blake Schneider's book, Save the Cat, and following his formula. In fact, many memoirists find certain beats confusing, and some wonder if this contrived Hollywood formula will work for their book. That's why I'm teaming up with Jane Friedman to teach Create Your Memoir's Beat Sheet on Wednesday, April 3rd, 2024. During this 90-minute webinar, you'll learn how to capitalize on the benefits of a beat sheet, scrap the parts that might not serve your story, discover how a beat sheet can be used even with a nonlinear memoir, and gain confidence as you shape your material into a compelling book. Best of all, this webinar is just $25. You heard me, $25. That includes the webinar, a PDF of my slides, and a comprehensive workbook that will help you apply these principles to your story, no matter the structure you've chosen. So if you want to tame your material, find your narrative arc, and feel confident that the book you're querying is truly the story you wish to tell, go to janefriedman.com and click online classes. Or make it easy on yourself and click on the link in the show notes. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Season 2 of the Writing Your Resilience podcast. I am delighted that you are here with me today. I want to thank all of you who were with me through Season 1, and I am so excited about what we have in store for this season. So this lineup includes a mix of authors, mental health professionals, and writers just like you who are working on their projects. And there are so many things that we are going to explore during this season. And here are just a few of them. We're going to talk about gaslighting and self-gaslighting. We're going to talk about narcissism, post-traumatic growth, and how to write stories about addiction, misunderstood illnesses, and mental illnesses, as well as how to survive a horrific online pile-on and what to do and how to risk it all in order to be your authentic self. All of these things are going to happen, and I have a special guest who is going to help you become a resilient editor. So all of these exciting things are going to happen during this season. And, you know, as I've been reflecting on Season 1 and thinking about these conversations that are getting ready to happen, I've been thinking about this issue that has come up several times in the interviews that needs to be addressed. And that issue is forgiveness. So here's my opinion, y'all. You can take it for what you want, but I truly believe this in the deepest parts of my heart. All creative nonfiction writing is forgiveness work. It is. And I hope that by the end of this episode, you're going to understand why I see it that way and how you can use this process to enhance your writing life and the meaning you make from the work that you do. But you know, For some people, this is the filthiest word out there, and they have a very good reason for thinking that way. Maybe they came from homes where the word forgiveness was used to cover up abuse, or it was used as a form of emotional or spiritual bypassing, or, they've just heard this word so many times that it absolutely has no meaning, and they're like, whatever. And you know what? Here's what I'm going to say to you. If you hate this word and the thought of exploring it further turns you off, or you know what, downright pisses you off, and you're like, ain't gonna do it, here's my invitation. I want you to choose a different word. You could choose reconciliation, which is the word that Laura Davis talked about in her episode for season 1, or maybe radical acceptance, something Zabib Abraham talked about, and also Dr. Ramani Durvasula, she will talk about in season 2. Or you could use the word integration or letting go, or you know what? Pick the word that you like. And if you're not sure what that is, just make a word up, and then when you finish listening, you can choose a word that works for you. Okay, so for now, just pick something that works for you. If you hate the word forgiveness, and every time you hear me say this F word, and again, the F word in this case is forgiveness, replace it with your own word so that we can go on this journey together. And then when you're done listening, I want you to tell me what you think about this, what questions come up for you, because I think this is something that we can talk about again and again. So I look forward to continuing this journey with you. So here are some things that are going to happen in this episode. I'm going to define forgiveness for you based on my definition and all of the research and study that I've done in this area. Then we're going to talk about what that process looks like and how it parallels the writing process. And I'm going to give you 2 powerful writing tools you can use to help you on your journey. So these are all of the things that we are going to talk about today. So buckle up and get ready for the ride. I want to begin, though, by telling you what forgiveness is not. Okay, because this is the stuff that makes people hate this word, and it might be the things that are coming up for you if you hear it. So number 1, forgiveness is not excusing bad behavior. If someone has harmed you, they have harmed you. End of story. If behavior is not okay, it's not okay, period. It is also not making it okay for other people. So if you forgive someone, you're not saying like, oh, that's okay. I know you didn't mean it. No, remember, if behavior is bad, end of story. You do not have to make someone feel better about it. It's okay if someone has harmed you and they feel some guilt or sadness or regret around it. Okay, so you do not have to make them feel better. You also do not have to purposefully make them feel terrible, right? But you don't have to make them feel better. So that's one thing that's really important to remember. You do not have to forget the past. You'll hear things people say, oh, forgive and forget, let's just move on. And that could be some of the pressure that people have, especially, if someone has really been harmed and they're trying to talk about it in a family that is invalidating, or a family that doesn't want to deal with its own dysfunction. Or, religious organization says, we forgive and forget, and that's the right thing to do. That this idea that you sweep it under the rug so that you can keep going. No, we're not going to do that. I want you to remember so that you can use what happened in the past to inform how you operate in the present and what you do in the future. So we're not going to forget the past. You also do not need to renew a broken relationship. This is one of the biggest fears that I see people have, like, well, wait, this person has harmed me and they continue to harm me. So you're telling me I have to forgive them. So that means I have to let them back in? No, you do not have to let somebody back in who has harmed you, not in the slightest. Okay. And we're going to talk about what you do at the last part of forgiveness and what decisions you make, but you do not have to invite someone back into your life, and you do not have to bury painful feelings. In fact, my friends, we are going to address them, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a couple of minutes. So let's talk about what forgiveness is. My definition of it based on my study, and feel free to add to it in the comments for this episode or send me an email about it. So I see forgiveness as a process of empowerment. There are a lot of different words that people can use for forgiveness. The one that I really like is the Aramaic word shabag, which means to untie. And so what we are doing is we are untying our lives in the present, from the victim story that we have been holding on to. And when I talk about a victim story, I mean the story of powerlessness that we are holding on to. This is really important because when people hear the word victim and I talk about victim story, sometimes people say, like, well, wait a second, but I was victimized by this person. I was hurt. Yes, you may have been a victim at the time when this happened. You may have been victimized. All of these things can be true, but when you continue to see the story from a certain perspective, especially a perspective of disempowerment and of powerlessness, you can keep yourself from being able to move on. So we're going to look at this story from different angles so that you can let go of what you're holding on to in your nervous system and also the story you're telling yourself. All right, so this is a process of empowerment because you are going to rewrite that story for yourself. Forgiveness is also a set of skills that you're going to learn and practice over time. It is not something that, it's a one and done thing like, oh, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to magically feel better. It is not how it works. This is a podcast episode on this. I teach this in various ways. So I have taught this as a 1 hour sampler webinar for people, 2 hours. I've done 6-hour trainings. And even in the 6-hour trainings, we are just scratching the surface. Okay, so I'm going to try to give you some concrete information. I will give you some resources, but no, this is a conversation we can have over time, and it is a set of skills that you will practice. And there's a very good reason why we do this. We do this as an opportunity to re-envision our lives and to heal, which is what most people are doing with creative nonfiction. And this is the important thing I want you to think about, and I want you to remember. We forgive for ourselves. It does not matter what's going on with the people that harmed us. We do it for ourselves. That's one of the ways that we empower ourselves. And we do it when we are ready. So what does that mean? You do not have to forgive. Okay. So making the choice not to forgive is actually engaging in the forgiveness process. And, I always invite people to have a list. Like you can have a list of like ready to forgive now, ready to forgive someday, and never forgive. Okay, so I have that list, and you'll notice that people will kind of move from like never forgive to, maybe one day to, okay, I'm ready, as you continue to heal and you evolve over the course of your life. But sometimes there are going to be people in your life that always are on that never forgive list. And you know what? I teach people about this. I talk about this stuff all the time. And guess what? There's still people on that list. And it is a-okay that that is there. And so you can make that choice. And if you think like, okay, yeah, I do want to do it, but I'm not ready, that's also okay. All right, because this is the hardest part about it. Most people think, okay, I'm going to forgive them because I want them to say sorry. And not everyone is going to be sorry, and they are not going to say sorry. And to truly go through this process, to make it about yourself, you have to be willing to do this even if the other person is not sorry. And you know what? Some of us are just not ready with certain people, and that's okay. And here's another thing that's going to be a hard pill to swallow. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. And yet, sometimes that's the first person you need to work on. So I'm going to talk to you about a series of steps that are part of the forgiveness process. Like, what does it look like? Okay, so it's not just this one thing. It is a process that you engage in over time, but there are things you need to do before you get there. So the process that I'm going to teach you is from the Book of Forgiving by Desmond Tutu and Mfo Tutu. So they developed this process during apartheid, or actually at the end of apartheid, and that was part of their truth and reconciliation process. This hard work the people of South Africa did to reunite and come together as a country. And it's work that still continues to go on. So that's the framework. But before we get to the framework, here are some things I have learned that people need to do before they even get there. So, number one, you have to have good boundaries. And you have to have good boundaries with the person who has hurt you, especially if they continue to hurt you. Okay. Because you cannot forgive a person who continues to hurt you. So, those boundaries could be, the kind of boundaries you might be thinking about, like distance, like maybe you're going to spend less time with that person or maybe no time, right? So there could be a proximity boundary that you set up, but you might be saying, the person who has really harmed me is my aging parent that I have to care for. And I am not willing to cut ties with that person or take a break from that person because I'm in a caregiving role. Does that mean I can't do this work? Not necessarily. Okay. There are things you can do. You can have an emotional or mental boundary. So, an emotional boundary might be like, yeah, I know that there is some care that I have to offer to this person. And maybe I'm going to offload some of it to other people so I can take a little bit of a break. Maybe I'm not going to be there all the time. And that's a choice you can make or not make. But I'm going to make the decision to not share my vulnerable heart with that person. I'm not going to share my vulnerable feelings, my wins, the things that really matter to me. I'm going to hold those to myself and keep that relationship more superficial. You might also choose to have a mental boundary with this person. And a mental boundary might look like things you tell yourself when they do the things that hurt you, right? So maybe, you tell them something and they give you a zinger, right? They say something like really awful to you, and you know that that's normally a trigger. You put up a mental shield like, oh, there it is. And then you talk to yourself in a different way. It takes training to do that. It's not easy, but these might be some things that you do that help you have better boundaries. Now, that's for other people, but you might be thinking like, okay, you told me that the person I need to work on is myself and we're doing self-forgiveness first. I can't leave myself. What do I do? So often the reason that we might want to work on self forgiveness is because we have guilt or shame over a behavior we've done in the past or a behavior we're continuing to do, or maybe just a way that we're thinking about ourselves or the way we're talking to ourselves. So a boundary might be, for the time being, you're not going to relive whatever that awful thing is that you think that you have done or that you have done, right? So when that comes up in your brain, you're going to go, no. So if you're watching this, you might see that my hand is raised. If you're listening, you're like, what are you doing? Okay, so I'm putting my hand up and saying, no, not today. And I'm closing my eyes. So I'm not even, looking at it. I'm doing something physical to stop the thought. And that will help disrupt the cycle of whatever that thing is that you ruminate on. Also, you may find like you talk to yourself in a really negative way. Oh, you're so stupid. Look at what you did. Look at this terrible thing. Again, put your hand up in front of you. Maybe close your eyes or keep them open and say no or stop. And then you can say no, thank you. And then you can say something nice to yourself. And again, this takes training. For some of us, it works really well to do this with a therapist. But making sure that you take time to establish these boundaries so that the hurt does not continue will help you be able to go through this process. And this is important if you're writing. So if you're a writer and you're like, I'm going to write my memoir about this really ugly thing that happened to me and how I was deeply hurt by X, Y, and Z, you need to take a break from X, Y, and Z. And that definitely means not talking to X, Y, and Z about what you're writing about. Save that for your writing group. Do not do this with everyone else, okay? Really important. So the other thing is self-care. You've got to care for yourself. And so I talk to people a lot about self-care and the difference between self-care and comfort. This is something I talked with Tia Levings about in her episode, which was episode 11 of season 1. And so, self-care is the proactive, regular caring for yourself. And you need to care for yourself in all areas. So you need to make sure that you are caring for your physical body by moving. Moving is really important through this because stuck energy moves when you move. Okay, so you're going to move, you're going to eat nutritious food, you're going to make sure you get Sleep, you're going to take breaks from this work. And this is really important. If you are writing a difficult story, you must take breaks from this story. And I know for those of you out there who are super motivated and want to get this done, you're like, but I don't want to take breaks. Well, you need to take breaks because that's how you care for yourself. Okay. So you also want to make sure that you have a supportive community. Support is really important. If you've been deeply hurt and you're working on a really deep issue in relation to forgiveness, you want to have a therapist on board because you need to have one person who can bear witness to your experience. And that cannot be your writing group. I'm sure your writing group, if you have one, is a lovely set of people and they do love you and they will be there. But there is a certain kind of bearing witness that they are not trained to do and not capable of, especially in a writing group or especially in a writing class. So you need to have that one person. You also need to have other people in your life who support you emotionally, but also people who you just have fun with, who cheer you on, all of these kinds of things. You need to have those people. And it also really helps to have people who are practicing alongside you. So if you have a writing group, maybe have everybody listen to this episode so that you're all beginning to speak the same language and understand the work that you're trying to do. So you want to have all of that, and you want to make sure that you are taking care of yourself in all of these other ways. You want to think about your job and how you're caring for yourself around your job, around your relationships with other people, the meaning that you make around things. I talk to people in different ways about spirituality, and that's another word people really hate is the S word. Here's what I mean by spirituality. Okay, so I want to be really clear about that. Spirituality is how you make meaning and where you find hope. Some people do that through religious organizations. Some people do that through nature, through being part of a group. It does not matter to me what you do. The only thing that I would invite you to do is to make sure that you know where you make meaning from, how you make meaning, and where you derive hope. And, as you begin to look at that, ask yourself, is it serving you? Do you like the answer? And if you don't like the answer, maybe seek out something else. Okay. But if you do, just be clear about what that is, because that is part of the self-care process. And that is part of what you need in order to do all of this work. Okay. So this is the pre-work. And as you're listening to the episodes in season 2, I want you to listen to what the professionals talk about. Okay, what guidance do they offer? What advice do they share? What recommendations do they offer? And then when you're listening to, the authors who've gone on some of these really tough journeys, what do they say? What did they do? Okay, listen to all of this so you can say, what are some tools I can pick up along the way that I can use on my journey? And all of that leads to what we're going to talk about, which is the process of forgiveness and how it parallels the writing process. So again, these 4 steps that I'm going to share with you now come from the Book of Forgiving by Desmond Tutu and Mfo Tutu. And this will be in the show notes. Okay. So if you are like, I don't know how to pronounce these words or spell them, don't worry. It's there. Okay. And I invite you to pick up this book and to read it. When I'm teaching forgiveness, I add all kinds of other things to this mix, but this is the foundational work. So here's the first thing you want to do. You need to tell your grievance story. This is the first thing in the book. Your grievance story is the story of hurt that you've had, okay? And it's often the first story that you tell other people. And, if you have a really big hurt, you may have found, I have to, I've told my therapist about it and I'm telling them again and again, or maybe you've written about it in different ways. In the drafting process, that's usually your first few drafts. You're writing it and you're trying to just make clear what happened. And this is important work. And you need to write this as many times as you need to, especially with really difficult stuff. So here's my invitation once again. If you want to learn how to do this and you want to experience this magic a little faster, choose something to start with that is not your big, deep core wound. Choose something that is uncomfortable and you don't really like it, but it isn't the hardest thing, because then you can practice these steps and you can get through all of them. Okay. And so you'll see what I mean in a moment. So you need to do this work of telling your grievance story, whatever that is. And this is your story of powerlessness for many of us, or the story of hurt. That's another way to think about it. And, don't judge those drafts. And I've talked about this in multiple times in previous episodes. You know, in your final draft, the draft that gets published, you need to make sure that you are keeping your side of the street clean by seeing things from multiple perspectives, verifying the truth, making sure you don't have a vendetta, that you're not writing from a place of anger. Okay, that's your final draft, but it is okay at this time to write the story from the wounded part of yourself. This is important work, and it leads to stronger, more impactful final drafts. Okay, so make sure that you give yourself space to do that. So that's step one, write your grievance story. Now we're going to get into step two, name the hurt. This is the stage most people want to avoid or rush through, but you have to make sure you give it your all. Okay, you need to take time to feel the deep well of feelings you may have around this experience. It's so important. And this is why, especially memoir, can take so many drafts, because we have to go through this process. And so, again, you are not just identifying the hurts that you have experienced, but you are also looking at the misperceptions you've had about how the world works, or about how the other people work, or about what things mean, the traps that you've fallen into. And as you do this, you will get in touch with the deep grief you may feel around a certain experience, anger, resentments, different kinds of hurt, and you have to take the time to feel them all. If you're dealing with something that is uncomfortable, it might just take a couple of drafts to do that work, and it may not, last that long. If you're dealing with deep core wounds, it's going to take a lot longer. But you have to make sure that you give yourself time to do that. And, I had the situation that took me 20 years to get over. 20 years. And you know what? I needed every single one, because I had so many deep feelings about this and so many layers to get through. And at first I had a lot of shame, but the more I learned about forgiveness, especially when reading this book, I realized, like, oh yeah, that is sometimes just how long it takes. And there are other things that I'm going to be in this stage probably forever, and that is okay. So, if you're dealing with big issues and you want to hurry up and get through this because you somehow think you're going to arrive on the other side, and you can make yourself do that, you can't force it to happen. Allow for it to last as long as you can. And the less you resist, the less those feelings will persist inside you. So that's something else to think about. And here's why you have to make sure that you take time to feel every single one of those feelings. Step 3 is a very tall order. You have to do what's called seeking humanity. In this step, you are coming to a place of acceptance about how people operate, how people are doing their best. And that's what you have to do. You have to get to a place where you can understand that someone is doing their best, even though their best may not be what you needed, may have been hurtful, may have caused you deep harm, a lot of pain, and that was their best. And gosh, is that sad. That can cause so much grief. Dr. Ramani and I, we talked about that, and you will hear that episode 11 of this season. And if you want to get to that sooner, buy her book, It's Not You. Again, that will be in the show notes. But yeah, so there's so much grief that we have to get to in order to get to this place of acceptance. And it is a magical place once you get there. And the drafting and writing process can help you get there faster, because you are going through the process of feeling and reliving as you do this writing. As long as you're focusing on making meaning, figuring out the mystery of why this is the way this is. And if you want to see what the magic looks like, pick up a copy of Melanie Brooks' first book, Writing Hard Stories. This includes a whole bunch of interviews that she did with authors of acclaimed memoirs, and they each talk about this issue, how when they finished their book, something was settled inside them. And it was because they got to this place and then the final one, and they did that work. Okay. So this is a space. So if you're thinking about, okay, well, how does this relate to the writing process? The first part, writing your grievance story, that's your first few drafts. You know, the next part, naming the hurt, that is like the deep, dark, hard drafts that we go through that are really messy and difficult. This is where we begin to figure out what our narrative arc is. And that is because we now have distance from the experience, or we're building distance. And we can begin to see, you know, I thought that this book was about this really terrible relationship. And oh my gosh, it's actually about this totally other thing, which is something that happened to me. I thought this book I was writing was about this relationship. And now I'm like, nope, it's about this totally other thing. And thank goodness I did this work on forgiveness, because now I see it. So this can get you to a place where you really understand what your narrative arc is, because you have let go of something that has had a powerful hold on you. Okay, and so there are 2 writing exercises you can do at this stage in the writing process that can help you get over the hump to help you figure out what your narrative arc is. This first one, I'm going to tell you about it with a warning, and I already know that at least one of you is going to be like, Lisa told me not to do this yet, so I'm going to do it right now. I know this because I've worked with people and I've trained people enough in this that they always do this. So if you choose to do this exercise, buyer beware. I'm telling you up front, don't do this until you're ready. So I'm going to explain what the writing exercise is, and then I'm going to tell you why it's important to wait until you're truly ready to get here. You cannot experience the magic of this writing exercise if you are not ready for it. If you do it too soon, it can cause a setback, or it can feel like poison inside you. And then you're going to write me an email that says, Lisa, this was a terrible idea and I feel really bad. Well, yeah, of course you do, because you weren't ready for it. So if you are dealing with deep, dark stuff, and you have a therapist, talk to your therapist about it first. So let me explain what this is, so it's not just a mystery, okay? You're going to take either a story that you have written about the big wound, right? So a scene about time when someone has really hurt you, or maybe you're writing in your journal about this. And then you are going to write about it from the perspective of the person who has hurt you. Now, I'm going to let you know that the first time this writing exercise was introduced to me, and I was told to do it in a writing class, I gave the instructor a mental middle finger. I was really mad about it because I was like, I'm not doing that. Are you kidding me? This person has hurt me so badly. What in the world are you asking me to do? And I had so much resistance. But I'd also done a ton of drafting, and I had done a ton of therapy around this issue. And so when I really checked in with myself, and I checked in with my therapist, was like, no, you really can do this. You just have resistance around it. So I did it. And it totally changed things. And it was like that connection of hurt that I had with this person. It's like you flipped a light switch off. That's the magic. But it only happens if you have taken the time to feel your feelings. So if you're early in the drafting process, you don't even have a first draft of whatever it is that you are working on, especially if it's a book, you are not ready for this exercise, my friend. So please put it away, because it will not help you. Also, there is a time when this exercise may never be the right exercise for you. And that is if you have come from a deeply invalidating environment where narcissism has been an issue. Again, if you want to know what narcissism is, you can look up the work of Dr. Ramani Durvasula, and you can also read her book, It's Not You. She has a great description of it. And also her whole book is about healing from narcissistic abuse. But, people who have been in relationships with narcissists, or they've been in highly abusive relationships where their experience of reality has been invalidated. So like you've, experienced something and there people say like, that's not true, or you're too sensitive, other people wouldn't be upset about that. Okay, those are signals that your point of view has been invalidated to the point where maybe you need to just own your own point of view. And also, you've probably spent a lot of time and a lot of energy trying to anticipate or understand the other person's point of view. And I don't want you to continue to do that. Okay, so remember, there may be times when this writing exercise does not serve you, even if you've done all kinds of work. You can choose not to do it. Okay, so I have warned you about don't do it too early, and also maybe don't do it at all if you've come from certain environments. But this exercise, this is one that can have powerful impact on you, and I think you can all do. And feel your feelings first, but you can do this one a little sooner. Here's the exercise. I want you to write about something that maybe where you were hurt. Okay, so it could be something you were hurt, because sometimes we have deep shame around our choices that we made in situations where we were trying to survive. And we think, like, oh my gosh, I should have stopped this, or I should have done something different. And so we have a lot of shame. Okay, or maybe you have done something that really was not okay. And we're not excusing bad behavior, but I want you to see this from a space that allows for some gentleness. So what you do is you write it as is first, you write the scene. Now I want you to rewrite the scene through the eyes of someone who loves you. This could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be a beloved pet. I often find pets are a great point of view to have because our pets love us unconditionally. They are always there. And if you're like, I don't know who that person is, before you decide to try this exercise, really figure out who that person is. And it needs to be someone that just loves you for who you are. And for some people, it is their therapist, right? That is the person who offers unconditional positive regard, who is there for you no matter what. And if that is the case, let that person be there. And also, if you're dealing with big pain, do this alongside a therapist. Okay, don't just try to go off and white knuckle this one yourself, but do this exercise and notice what changes for you. What changes in terms of how you feel about that situation? What changes in terms of how you talk to yourself, how you operate, how you behave, how you write about the story? This can be the preparatory work that gets you ready for the first exercise that I mentioned. Okay. But I mentioned this one second because we always remember what we hear second. And this is the one I want you to remember and I want you to do. And this one will appear in the show notes. Okay. So that is step 3. And as I said, it's a super tall freaking order, but it leads to step 4. And the final step is to renew or release the relationship with the person that you're working to forgive. And I'm going to talk about what that looks like for both yourself and for someone else. We're going to start with someone else because that's easier and a little more concrete. Okay. So if you have gone through this process and you are able to see the humanity in the other person, you still have some work to do. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is figure out what would be needed for this relationship to continue. Maybe it is an apology. Okay, maybe it is a change in behavior on their part. Maybe you need them to do something. Just figure out what that is. Right now, in this first part, you're not worrying about the other person. You're just worrying about what do you need. Okay, that's the first thing I want you to do. Then, once you figured out what it is you need, then you're going to think about whether or not that person has the capacity to give it to you. Can they say they're sorry and mean it? Can they change their behavior? Or is there a possibility that they could wound you further in the exact same way, right? And let me just, say this about human relationships. Like, we screw up all the time, right? Even in the best of relationships, there's a chance that you're going to say something or do something that is intentionally or unintentionally harmful to another person. And then you have to take responsibility for it and do something different. But some people are not willing to take responsibility for their behavior or change their behavior, or they can't even see that what they do is wrong. So if you know that that other person's capacity for giving you what you need is low and the chance of getting hurt again is high, this might not be a relationship that serves you. And it may be time to let that go. And again, this may not mean that you're going to be completely estranged for this person and you're going to cut all ties. I'm not suggesting that. Only you could make that decision. And, when it comes to estrangement, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a path that I have been down. Okay. So I know what it's like. And I know that it is completely okay. And sometimes it is the exact right thing to do. And it is not without consequences. So you want to make sure that you are doing what you can live with, right? Because you're the person that has to live with the decisions you make. So when it comes to this, you may have higher boundaries. Maybe you let go of or you release the dream of the relationship that you wanted to have with that person. And you instead accept the limited relationship you can have. Maybe this person has a high chance of shaming you or blaming you or doing something that is, invalidates your experience. So you're not going to share your wins and victories or your big painful moments with them. You're going to choose to do that with other people. Okay, so that's a choice that you can make. And that is a way to release a relationship without total estrangement. For others, you may just decide, you know what? This relationship does not serve me and I am going to let it go. However, there may be some relationships where you're like, I see this differently now. And I see how either this person has changed or they've always had the capacity to do things differently. And maybe I just didn't know how to have this conversation. And you make a plan for renewing the relationship and having that conversation. And if you have a conversation with someone where you express the hurts that have happened to you, pay attention to what they do, because that is information. And that can also help you decide whether or not you want to continue to pursue that or you need to revisit the idea of releasing again. The only way sometimes that we know is through experimenting. So don't worry about getting it wrong. It is okay. This is one thing that took me a really long time to understand. And it is something I still have to work on from time to time, but you always have the opportunity and the privilege of changing your mind. You can change your mind at any time, and it really is okay. So give yourself permission to change your mind if you need to, right? You can decide, oh, I'm going to renew this relationship. Whoops, nope, maybe not. I'm going to do something different. Okay. So you have those opportunities. So as I said, that is a pretty tall order. And when it comes to the writing process, this idea of renewing or releasing these relationships happens in those final drafts when we're really making clear sense of our experience and we're writing it in a way that shows compassion for ourselves and for other people. It's also the point when, especially I'm going to pause and just say, if you are writing a story for the public and you're wondering, like, when should I tell my main characters about this? My invitation would be to wait until it's time to publish. Like, wait till you already have a book deal and you've gone through final editing. You've probably heard me say this several times in different ways in season 1. I will say it again later on, probably in another episode, but that is a way to protect yourself. But at a certain point, you become ready to have the conversations around your project that will lead to a final draft where you are keeping your side of the street clean. Again, that's where you are having compassion for yourself and other people. And you're also not necessarily shying away from bad behavior, right? But you're writing about it in a way that understands that behavior does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in a context, and the context is there, and you have included only what actually belongs in your book. That's how the renewing and releasing part is related to the writing process. But what do you do if you are trying to forgive yourself and you're like, how does renewing or releasing a relationship work with myself? What do I do? So first, own your behavior. And then ask yourself, am I ready to change this behavior? And if you are, learn how to do it and know that you do not have to do it perfectly. Okay, so you do not have to do this perfectly, but work with a therapist so that you can change whatever that behavior is or whatever that situation is. One thing that can also help is making amends. So amends are where you are doing something different. And one of the most powerful things that you can do that's different is change your behavior. So changing your behavior is an amends that you can make that is a form of restitution for a harm that maybe you caused to another person or to yourself. So you make amends. And, sometimes people will say, like, well, what if that person is no longer in my life? Maybe they cut ties with me, or, I don't know, we broke up. Or what if they're dead? Like, how do I make amends in that situation? And here's what you do. Whatever that thing is, whatever that form of restitution or that thing is that you feel like you wanted to give to that other person or do for that other person, do it for other people. So here's a concrete example. My brother, when he died, I really believed that it was my fault and I didn't tell him that I loved him. And because he's dead, I can never go back and fix that. So that was a very powerful lesson to me, that things can happen in relationships and you don't get a chance to say, I love you again. I always say, I love you to people. And if something's on my mind, if like I get that spidey sense, like, oh, I need to say this thing and it's uncomfortable, I listen to the spidey sense and I say it. Okay. So that's an amends I make, for someone that's no longer here. And that is a way that I have changed my behavior and it sets things right for me. Okay. So my brother could have, if he were still here, he might be like, Lisa, that wasn't that big of a deal. You did all these other things right. Or he might have been like, yeah, you were a super big jerk. Who knows what he's going to say, right? Because he's not here. I can only imagine it. But either way, I know I've done something to keep my side of the street clean. Okay. And as I do that, I release the old story. And that is part of how we renew or release the relationship with ourselves, is we release that old story, right? And we renew a different relationship with ourselves. Complex work, my friends. Again, tall order to do all this stuff. And there are some ways that we get ourselves in trouble with this process. So I always like to let people know so that you can own it when it happens, because it's okay if it happens. It really is. Number one, we tend to rush through the process or skip steps, especially step 2, right? You might be thinking like, I don't want to feel these feelings anymore, or this is making my writing process take too long and I want to hurry up and get this done. Don't rush the steps. If you are writing about a very deep wound, that story is a sacred story. And it deserves all of the time and care and attention you give to it, because once it goes out into the world, it's for everybody else. It's not yours anymore. And you want to send something out that feels settled. Another thing that can happen is we can have a really powerful secondary gain. Sometimes, somebody has behaved badly and we're like, let me tell you how much of a jerk this person is. And you have a juicy, juicy story to tell. And everybody else is like, oh my God, they are a jerk. And it feels pretty good to be the good guy and have a bad guy. That can be a form of secondary gain that we get that keeps us attached to stories that don't serve us. Some other things that get us in trouble is sometimes we can just be afraid of what's next. If we let go of this hurt, what will life be like? What will we have to make room for? How will we have to grow? And that can be really terrifying. And if that's, your experience, just hold space for it. Be really gentle. Allow for time to pass so that you can do this work slowly. And a final thing that gets in the way is sometimes we don't set good enough boundaries, and we try to forgive someone who continues to hurt us. And as I said early in this podcast episode, you can't forgive someone who is continuing to harm you, because more hurts continue. Okay. So this is just something to keep in mind. And again, you don't have to feel bad or judgy about it, but just make sure that you are going to be gentle about it. So Brene Brown says forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past can be any different. And you know what? It is a radical acceptance of the way things are. And it is such big, powerful work, because when you can radically accept the way things are, you can decide what's next. And that is how you remove the chains that bind you to whatever is holding you back. And when we empower ourselves through this work, we don't just live more resilient lives, we teach other people how to be resilient too. You are forging a path for others by living the best life you can. So, as you listen to the season and maybe reflect back on episodes from season 1, or maybe listen to them again, I want you to think about, where do these ideas of forgiveness and reconciliation or integration come up? And I want you to think about where you are in this process and how you can use the insights that the writers and the mental health professionals that I interview in the season offer, how you can use them to give yourself hope that change is possible, or how you can use them to build a new insight for yourself or develop a new tool that helps you see yourself and others more clearly, so that you can live more authentically and show up more courageously, so that the story you are living from here on out serves as that burning torch for the people behind you. And may that work that you do be what helps all of us become whole. Many thanks to all of you for your support through season 1. And once again, I want to welcome you to season 2, and let's go on this journey together. Are you a writer who struggles with doubts? Do you wonder if your stories are good enough? Do you wish you had some simple tricks that would make the writing life just a little bit easier? Become part of my Writing and Resilience community by signing up for my newsletter. As a thank you, you'll receive a free copy of Write More, Fret Less, 5 brain hacks that will supercharge your productivity, creativity, and confidence. The link is in the show notes. That's it for today's episode. Before you leave, I would love your help spreading the word about this podcast. You can do this in a few very simple ways. Click on the subscribe button in the upper right-hand corner, then leave a 5-star review. You can also let me know what you think or share ideas for the podcast by connecting with me on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or through my Writing and Resilience newsletter, which you can have delivered directly to your inbox.